Hotel worker insults disguised Taylor Swift. What she did next made him cry. Marcus stared at his reflection in the lobby's glass doors, adjusting his navy blue tie for the 100th time that evening. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed another sleepless night, and his usually neat black hair was starting to rebel against the gel he'd applied 12 hours ago. The elegant Four Seasons lobby stretched behind him, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers, mocking his deteriorating appearance with its perfection. "Hey, Marcus," Sarah from housekeeping called out as she pushed her cart past the front desk. "You look like hell." "Thanks for noticing," he muttered, forcing a weak smile. "Love the honesty." "Just speaking truth, honey. When's the last time you actually slept?" Marcus glanced at his watch. 8:47 p.m. Still 3 hours and 13 minutes until his shift ended. Bold of you to assume I remember what sleep is. The sound of shattering glass interrupted their conversation. A guest's child had dropped their milkshake on the pristine marble floor, creating a pink explosion that looked like a crime scene. The mother stood there, tapping away on her phone, not even acknowledging the mess. "I got it." Sarah sighed, already reaching for her cleaning supplies. "No, wait." Marcus grabbed paper towels from behind the desk. "Let me help. Beat standing here watching my soul leave my body." As they cleaned up the sticky mess, the mother finally looked up from her phone. "Oh my God, you're getting it all over my Louboutins. Do you know how much these cost?" Marcus bit his tongue so hard he tasted blood. "My sincere apologies, ma'am. We'll have this cleaned up in just a moment." "Well, this is just unacceptable. I want to speak to your manager." "Of course you do," he muttered under his breath. "What was that?" "I said I'll get them right away, ma'am." 10 minutes later, Marcus stood in David's office, his manager's face growing redder by the second. The vein in David's forehead, the one the staff had nicknamed the mood ring, was throbbing visibly. "So let me get this straight," David said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You not only failed to prevent a spill in our lobby, but you also got attitude with a VIP guest?" "David, come on. She was being completely unreasonable." "I don't care if she was doing cartwheels and juggling chainsaws. This is the Four Seasons. We don't do attitude here." David leaned back in his leather chair, the springs creaking in protest. "That's strike two, Marcus. One more incident, and we're going to have a very different conversation. Got it?" Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably Lily again, sending another paragraph about why they needed space and how he'd changed. He ignored it. "Got it," he replied flatly. Back at the front desk, Marcus checked his phone. Sure enough. "Marcus, I've been thinking more about our conversation. You're not the same person I met 2 years ago. The job has changed you. You're angry all the time. You never want to do anything fun anymore. And honestly, I can't remember the last time you really smiled. I think we need to take a break. I'm sorry." "Perfect," he whispered, dropping his phone into his desk drawer with a thud. "Just perfect." The next few hours blurred together in a parade of entitled demands and forced smiles. A guest insisted their room faced the wrong direction, despite specifically requesting that direction in their booking. Another complained that the clouds were ruining their view of the city. A third wanted Marcus to personally taste their room service food to ensure it wasn't poisoned. At 10:30 p.m., Tommy from the night shift called in sick. "You've got to be kidding me." Marcus groaned into the phone as David delivered the news. "Look, I know you've already pulled a double this week, but let me guess, you need me to cover. Just until 6 a.m., I'll make it up to you." Marcus wanted to scream. Instead, he said, "Sure, David, whatever you need." The lobby slowly emptied as the night wore on. Marcus watched the cleaning staff polish the same spots they'd cleaned hours earlier, their movements mechanical, automated. Just like his customer service smile. Just like his, "How may I assist you today?" just like his entire existence in this gilded cage of luxury hospitality. At 11:15 p.m., a group of drunk businessmen stumbled through the lobby, their voices echoing off the marble walls. "Sir, please keep your voices down," Marcus called out. "We have guests sleeping." "Do you know how much we're paying to stay here?" One of them slurred, his tie askew. "Yes, sir. The same as everyone else who's trying to sleep." The man's face reddened. "Listen here, you little—" "Brad, come on," his colleague interrupted, dragging him toward the elevators. "Not worth it." Marcus's hands were shaking as he watched them leave. The comment echoed in his head. Not worth it. Story of his life lately. His phone buzzed again in the drawer. Against his better judgment, he checked it. "I'm coming by tomorrow to get my things from your place. I left my key with your neighbor. I think it's better if we don't see each other for a while." Something inside Marcus cracked. 2 years. 2 years of dates and dreams and plans, reduced to a text message and a key left with his nosy neighbor. He slammed a drawer shut so hard that Janet, the night cleaner, jumped. "You okay, honey?" she asked, pausing her vacuuming. "Just fantastic, Janet. Living the dream." She gave him a sad smile. "You know, my grandson used to work at a hotel. Burned him out something fierce. Sometimes the best thing you can do is—" The front doors swung open, cutting off Janet's advice. A blast of cold air swept through the lobby, carrying with it the faint smell of rain and the sound of distant thunder. A figure in an oversized black hoodie stepped inside, blonde hair barely visible beneath a baseball cap. Large sunglasses covered most of their face at nearly midnight in a well-lit lobby. Marcus fought the urge to roll his eyes. Another wannabe celebrity thinking they were being subtle. He'd seen it 100 times before. Social media influencers with 12 followers trying to act famous, aspiring actresses practicing their incognito looks, trust fund kids playing at being mysterious. The woman approached the front desk, keeping her head down. Her shoes were expensive, Christian Louboutin boots that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. At least she had the budget for her little game of pretend. "I need to check in," she said quietly. "The reservation should be under Elizabeth Watson." Marcus didn't bother hiding his exhaustion as he typed the name into the system. The computer returned no results, exactly as he'd expected. These types never actually had reservations. They just wanted attention, wanted to be treated like they were somebody. He let out an exaggerated sigh. "No reservation under that name. Are you sure you have the right hotel?" "I'm certain," she replied, still eerily calm. "Could you check again? Maybe under Taylor?" And there it was. Marcus felt something snap inside him, the final thread of his professional demeanor breaking under the weight of this ridiculous charade. All the frustration, all the humiliation, all the pain of the day came rushing to the surface. He looked at her, really looked at her, and let out a cruel laugh. "Listen, honey, this isn't some budget motel where you can just waltz in pretending to be Taylor Swift. We get wannabes like you all the time. The Halloween store called. They want their bad disguise back." The lobby fell silent. Even Janet's vacuum cleaner stopped humming. In that moment, as the woman slowly reached for her sunglasses, Marcus had no idea that his life was about to change forever. But that's the thing about breaking points. You never see them coming until you're already falling. The silence in the lobby felt heavier than ever. Janet had stopped pretending to clean, her vacuum cleaner forgotten beside her as she watched the scene unfold. Even the constant hum of the air conditioning seemed to have died down, as if the building itself was holding its breath. "I don't have time for this," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "If you don't have a real reservation, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We're a 5-star hotel, not a TikTok backdrop." A young bellhop, Kevin, who had been arranging luggage carts nearby, tried to catch Marcus's eye, frantically shaking his head. But Marcus was too far gone, too deep in his spiral of bitterness to notice the warning sign. "You know what's funny?" Marcus leaned forward on the desk, his voice getting louder. "I've seen better Taylor Swift costumes at middle school talent shows. At least they put some effort into it. This?" He gestured at her outfit. "This is just lazy." The woman hadn't moved. She stood perfectly still, one hand still on her sunglasses, the other gripping the strap of an expensive-looking bag. The lobby's crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across her face, making her expression impossible to read. "Sir," she said, her voice still remarkably composed, "I understand you're having a difficult night, but—" "Oh, now you're going to try to sound like her too?" Marcus interrupted with a harsh laugh. "Let me guess, you've watched all her interviews on YouTube? Practiced that sweet, understanding voice in the mirror?" Thunder crashed outside, closer now. The storm that had been threatening all evening was finally arriving, much like the disaster Marcus was bringing upon himself. Rain began to pelt the glass doors, creating a dramatic backdrop to the unfolding scene. Kevin the bellhop had disappeared, probably running to find David. Janet had backed away toward the cleaning supply closet, but couldn't tear her eyes away from the train wreck unfolding before her. "I've worked here for 3 years," Marcus continued, his words tumbling out now, unchecked and uncensored. "You want to know how many fake Taylor Swifts I've seen? How many people think they can just walk in here playing dress-up?" The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him with an intensity that should have been his first clue. But he was too lost in his own pain, too wrapped up in his bitterness to notice the shift in the air. "You really should." She started again, but Marcus wasn't finished. "No, you should find another hobby. Maybe try being yourself for once instead of pretending to be someone else. Because this?" He gestured at her again. "This is just sad. And I don't mean Taylor Swift breakup song sad. I mean pathetic sad." That's when she did it. With deliberate slowness, she removed her sunglasses completely. The lobby lights caught her eyes, those unmistakable, famous eyes that had graced countless magazine covers and music videos. Eyes that were now fixed directly on Marcus with an expression that made his soul want to crawl under the marble floor and die. The sound Marcus made was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper as reality came crashing down around him. His legs went weak, and he had to grab the desk to steady himself. Standing before him, in the flesh, was Taylor Swift herself. And he had just spent the last 5 minutes brutally insulting her. Time seemed to stop in the Four Seasons lobby. The rain outside provided a steady drumbeat to Marcus's racing heart as he stared into Taylor Swift's eyes, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The security camera in the corner whirred as it turned, documenting what was surely about to become his last moment as an employed person. I. His throat felt like sandpaper. The room started spinning slightly. Janet, still frozen by her vacuum cleaner, let out a small, "Oh, sweet Jesus," under her breath. Kevin the bellhop had reappeared with David in tow, both of them stopping dead in their tracks at the scene before them. Taylor Swift stood perfectly still, her removed sunglasses now folded neatly in her hand. She wasn't angry, not exactly. There was something else in her expression, something that made Marcus feel even worse than rage would have. Disappointment. "Ms. Swift," David practically sprinted forward, nearly slipping on the polished floor. "I cannot begin to apologize enough for—" Taylor held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Her eyes never left Marcus's face. "I'd like to finish checking in first, if that's all right." Her voice was steady, controlled, professional, everything Marcus's hadn't been. David shot Marcus a look that clearly said, "You're dead," before turning back to Taylor with his most ingratiating smile. "Of course, Miss Swift. Please, allow me to handle this personally." No, the word wasn't loud, but it carried weight. "I'd like Mr." She glanced at Marcus's name tag. "Mr. Anderson to complete my check-in." We were in the middle of something. Marcus's hands were shaking so badly he could barely type. The keyboard felt foreign under his fingers, like he'd forgotten every basic function of his job. which, given the circumstances, he probably had. The reservation, Taylor continued calmly, should be under Sarah Thompson. Of course it was. Marcus wanted to punch himself. Every major celebrity used aliases. It was Hotel Management 101. He'd known this. He'd been trained for this. But he'd been too busy being cruel to do his actual job. The reservation appeared instantly on his screen. Suite 1989, of course. Everything was already arranged, all the special requests noted, all the privacy measures in place. He'd failed at literally the most basic part of his job, checking the alternate names list. "I see it now," he managed to croak. "I'm so sorry. I should have." "Checked properly?" Taylor finished for him. "Yes, you should have. But that's not really what you should be most sorry about, is it?" The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. She was right. His incompetence was bad enough, but his cruelty? That was so much worse. David stepped forward again, his forehead vein now threatening to escape his skull entirely. "Ms. Swift, I assure you that this kind of behavior is completely unacceptable at our establishment. Mr. Anderson will be completing my check-in." Taylor interrupted again, her tone making it clear this wasn't up for debate. "And then, if he's willing, I'd like to have a word with him." Marcus nearly dropped the key cards he was encoding. Have a word with him? Was this how it ended? Was Taylor Swift personally going to ensure he never worked in hospitality? The next few minutes passed in a blur of mechanical movements, encoding keys, explaining amenities he'd explained 1,000 times before, arranging for luggage service which Kevin would handle, judging by how eagerly he stepped forward, all while avoiding eye contact with everyone in the lobby, especially Taylor. "Your suite is ready, Ms. Swift," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Kevin will show you." "The luggage can go up," Taylor said. "But first, is there somewhere private we could talk?" David immediately gestured toward his office. "My office is at your disposal, Ms. Swift. I'll personally ensure." Actually, Taylor cut him off for the third time. "I saw a small conference room off the lobby earlier. Would that work?" Marcus nodded numbly, already reaching for the key to the Maple Room. It was their smallest conference space, usually used for business travelers who needed a quiet place to take calls. Now it would be the site of his professional execution. Perfect. Taylor turned to her security team, who had materialized seemingly out of nowhere. "Give us 15 minutes. The large men in dark suits looked uncertain, but nodded. They'd clearly learned not to argue with her. David started to protest again, but Taylor's raised eyebrow silenced him more effectively than any words could have. Marcus led the way to the Maple Room, each step feeling like he was walking to his own funeral. The small room was simple but elegant, with a round table that could seat 8 people comfortably. Taylor chose a seat that faced the door, gesturing for Marcus to sit across from him. He did, his legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of thunder and the hum of the building's heating system. Finally, Taylor leaned forward slightly. "Do you know what the worst part of that whole interaction was, Marcus?" He shook his head, not trusting his voice. "It wasn't the incompetence. Everyone makes mistakes. It wasn't even the rudeness, though that was pretty spectacular." She paused, studying his face. "The worst part was watching someone be deliberately cruel just because they thought they could get away with it. Just because they thought the person they were talking to didn't matter." Marcus felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. He blinked hard, trying to hold them back. "The thing is," Taylor continued, her voice softening slightly, "I don't think that's really who you are. At least, I hope it's not. Because the Marcus Anderson I saw out there, he seemed like someone who's lost his way, someone who's forgotten what it feels like to be on the receiving end of me." The tears were coming faster now, and Marcus couldn't stop them. Everything, the breakup with Lily, the job stress, the constant pressure to be perfect, it all came crashing down at once. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry. You're right. I don't. I don't even recognize myself anymore. Taylor reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. I want to show you something, she said, scrolling through her device. Something that might help you remember who you really are. Marcus wiped his eyes with his sleeve, trying to regain some composure. What could she possibly want to show him? A record of his behavior to report to hotel corporate? A social media post she was about to make about his awful treatment? Instead, she turned the phone toward him, displaying a tweet from 5 years ago. His tweet. The memory hit him like a physical blow. He remembered writing it, sitting in his bedroom after another horrible day at school. Remembered how her music had been the only thing that made him feel less alone. At Taylor Swift 13, I got beat up at school again today. Came home and played Mean on repeat. You make me feel strong. Thank you. And suddenly, Marcus Anderson, the bitter, angry hotel worker who just insulted Taylor Swift, broke down completely. His shoulders shook as sobs racked his body. All the protective walls he'd built, all the cynicism he'd wrapped around himself like armor, crumbled in an instant. That tweet, that desperate cry for connection from his teenage self, had shattered something inside him. I remember this tweet, Taylor said softly, giving him a moment to collect himself. I was on tour when I saw it. I showed it to my mom that night, told her this was why we do what we do, why the music mattered. Marcus tried to speak, but only managed a choked sound. Taylor pulled a pack of tissues from her bag and slid them across the table. You know what else I remember? She continued, her voice gentle but firm. I remember thinking about that kid, about you, during shows. Wondering if you were in the audience, hoping you were okay, hoping the music was still helping. Finally finding his voice, Marcus whispered, It did. It helped so much. He wiped his eyes with a tissue, his hands still trembling. I used to listen to Mean before school every day. It made me feel brave. And now look at you, Taylor said. But there was no judgment in her voice, just sadness. You became exactly what that song was about. The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. He had become the very thing his younger self had feared, someone who hurt others just because he could, someone mean. Outside the maple room, shadows passed by the frosted glass as hotel staff tried to casually walk past, hoping to catch snippets of the conversation. A gentle knock at the door made them both look up. Ms. Swift? It was one of her security team. Just checking if everything's okay. We're fine, John, she called back. 5 more minutes. Marcus stared at the crumpled tissue in his hands. I don't even know how I got here, he admitted. It's like somewhere along the way, I just started getting harder, colder. Every entitled guest, every demanding client, every little humiliation, it just built. Until you couldn't feel anything except the bitterness? Taylor suggested. He nodded, surprised by how perfectly she'd captured. You know what the irony is? She continued, leaning back in her chair. I get it. Better than most people, actually. Do you have any idea how many people try to tear me down every day? How many cruel comments? How many harsh judgments I face? Marcus felt a fresh wave of shame wash over him. Of course she understood. She'd been in the spotlight since she was a teenager, facing criticism and mockery on a global scale. But you didn't let it change you, he said quietly. Taylor laughed, a genuine, surprisingly warm sound. Oh, it changed me. It had to. But I got to choose how it changed me. That's the secret, Marcus. We all get hurt. We all face criticism and judgment and meanness. But we get to choose what we do with that pain. Another knock at the door, more insistent this time. Ms. Swift? The suite is ready. Taylor held up one finger toward the door, then turned back to Marcus. You know what I think? I think that kid who found strength in my music is still in there. The one who understood what it felt like to be bullied, to be hurt. The one who knew the importance of kindness. She stood up, smoothing her hoodie. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Marcus rose on shaky legs, his mind spinning. I don't know where to start. Yes, you do. Taylor moved toward the door, then paused. Start by remembering who you were before the world made you hard. That kid who tweeted me, he knew exactly who he wanted to be. She reached for the door handle, then turned back one last time. "Oh, and Marcus?" "Yes?" "Don't worry about your job. I'm not going to demand you be fired, actually." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "I think you're exactly where you need to be right now." With that, she opened the door. Her security team immediately flanked her, and Kevin practically materialized with her luggage cart. As they moved toward the elevators, Marcus stood in the doorway of the maple room, watching her go. David appeared at his side, the vein in his forehead still pulsing. "Marcus, in my office. Now." But Marcus barely heard him. He was too busy thinking about a scared teenager playing mean on repeat, finding strength in music when he couldn't find it anywhere else, thinking about how far he'd strayed from that person, and wondering if he could ever find his way back. The next few hours passed in a blur. After Taylor disappeared into the elevator, David had dragged Marcus into his office for what should have been a career-ending conversation. Instead, they'd received an email from Taylor's management team asking that Marcus remain in his position. David had been bewildered, but couldn't exactly argue with one of their most high-profile guests. "I don't know what happened in that room," David said, rubbing his temples, "but you've got to be the luckiest idiot I've ever met." Now, at 3 a.m., Marcus sat alone at the front desk, staring into space. The lobby was silent except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the occasional ping of the elevator. Janet had gone home, but not before giving him a long, concerned look. "You okay, sugar?" she'd asked, touching his shoulder gently. He just nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His phone buzzed, another message from Lily. He ignored it. How could he explain what had just happened? That Taylor Swift had somehow remembered a tweet he'd written as a scared, lonely teenager. That she'd seen right through his bitter facade to the lost soul underneath? "Hey, Anderson." Marcus looked up to see Kevin the bellhop approaching the desk, his usual cheerful expression replaced with something more serious. "What do you want, Kevin?" "Just checking on you, man. That was intense early." Marcus let out a hollow laugh. "Intense? Yeah, that's one way to put it." Kevin leaned against the desk, fiddling with his name tag. "You know, when I first started here, you were different. You used to help the new guys, show us the ropes. What happened?" "I don't know," Marcus sighed, but that wasn't entirely true. He did know. He'd just been too caught up in his own bitterness to see it. The elevator pinged, and both men straightened up, expecting a guest. But it was just empty, doors opening to reveal no one. Sometimes the old building did that, like it was sighing. "You know what's weird?" Marcus said, more to himself than Kevin. "I used to love this job, actually loved it. Helping people, solving problems, making their day a little better." Kevin nodded. "I remember. You were the one who told me that every guest has a story, and our job is to be part of the good one." Marcus winced at the memory of his own words. When had he stopped believing that? The silence was interrupted by the click of heels on marble. One of Taylor's security team, a tall woman with short gray hair, approached the desk. "Mr. Anderson?" Marcus's heart rate spiked. "Yes?" "Miss Swift would like to see you. Room 1989. Kevin's eyes widened. "Dude." "Now?" Marcus glanced at the clock. "It's 3 a.m. The security woman's expression didn't change. She's working on new material. She often keeps unusual hours during the creative process. Marcus looked around helplessly, but the night shift was skeletal. Just him, Kevin, and the security guard. "Go," Kevin said. "I'll cover the desk." Not like anyone's checking in at 3 a.m. anyway. The elevator ride to the 19th floor felt like an eternity. Marcus's reflection in the mirrored walls looked pale and disheveled. He tried to fix his tie, but his hands were shaking too badly. The security woman, who introduced herself as Maria, led him down the plush hallway to suite 1989. She knocked 3 times in a specific pattern. "Come in," Taylor's voice called out. The suite was not what Marcus expected. Instead of the usual pristine hotel room setup, it looked like a creative hurricane had swept through. Notebooks and pieces of paper were scattered everywhere. A guitar lay on the sofa, and a laptop sat open on the coffee table, displaying what looked like music production software. Taylor sat cross-legged on the floor, wearing sweatpants and an oversized university hoodie. Her hair was up in a messy bun, and she had reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked normal, human. "Thanks, Maria," she said, not looking up from the notebook she was writing in. "Could you give us a few minutes?" Maria nodded and stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "Sit," Taylor said, finally looking up. She gestured to a nearby armchair. "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier." Marcus sat down carefully, feeling like he might wake up from this surreal dream at any moment. "I want to show you something else," she continued, reaching for her phone. "After our talk, I did some digging through my old social media interactions. You weren't just a one-time tweeter, were you?" She turned the screen toward him, and Marcus felt his breath catch. There they were, all his old tweets to her, years of them. Messages about how her music got him through bad days, how her lyrics made him feel understood, how her songs gave him courage. "At Taylor Swift 13 got into my dream college today. Played Fearless on repeat while opening the letter for courage. At Taylor Swift 13, my mom's in the hospital, but the best day is helping me stay strong. Thank you for writing. At Taylor Swift 13, first day at my new job. Your music taught me to be fearless, and now I'm living my dream." That last one, Marcus remembered writing it, his first day at the Four Seasons. He'd been so proud, so excited to work at such a prestigious hotel, so determined to make people feel welcome and special. "What happened to him?" Taylor asked quietly. "That kid who found magic in music and hope in hotel lobby?" And that's when Marcus broke down completely. Not the quiet tears from earlier. This was full, body-shaking sobs. Years of suppressed emotion, of hardening his heart, of losing himself. It all came pouring out. "I'm sorry," he gasped between sobs. "I'm so sorry. I lost my way. I lost everything I believed in." Taylor set her phone down and moved to sit on the arm of a nearby chair, close enough to show support but giving him space to process. "You know what's interesting?" she said softly, letting him cry. "In all those tweets, you never once asked for anything. No concert tickets, no meet and greets, no special treatment. You just wanted to share how the music made you feel, how it helped you." Marcus wiped his eyes with his sleeve, trying to regain some composure. "Because that's all that mattered. The songs. They were like friends when I had none. They understood when nobody else did." "And now?" Taylor's voice was gentle but probing. "What happened to that connection? When did you stop letting yourself feel?" Marcus stared at his hands, thinking about all the name tags he'd worn, all the guests he'd served, all the times he'd slowly built up walls around his heart. "It started small," he admitted. "Little things. A rude guest here, an entitled complaint there. I started seeing people as problems to solve instead of people." He looked up at her, his eyes red. "I became everything I used to hate." Taylor reached over to a side table and grabbed a notebook and pen. "Write it down." "What?" "Write down what you're feeling right now. All of it. The shame, the regret, the realization. Write it like you used to tweet, straight from the heart." Marcus took the notebook with trembling hands. For a moment, he just stared at the blank page. Then, slowly, he began to write. "I lost myself in a marble lobby, trading empathy for efficiency. Forgot the boy who found strength in song. Too busy being strong to be me. Each bitter word a brick in my wall, until I couldn't feel at all." He stopped, embarrassed. "I'm not a writer." "Neither was I once," Taylor said, taking the notebook and reading his words. "But this is honest. This is real." She tapped the page. "This is the Marcus who used to tweet about finding courage in music." A knock at the door interrupted them. Maria poked her head in. "Ms. Swift, you have that call with London in 20 minutes. Taylor nodded, then turned back to Marcus. "Come here. I want to show you one more thing." She led him to the suite's large windows overlooking the city. The storm had passed, and the first hints of dawn were starting to color the horizon. "Look down there," she said, pointing to the hotel entrance far below. "What do you see?" Marcus squinted. "The entrance? The driveway?" "Look closer." Tell me what you really see. He looked again. A taxi was pulling up. A young woman was getting out, looking nervous and excited. Probably her first time at a luxury hotel. I see. He paused, really looking. I see someone's story beginning. Maybe their first big trip, or a special occasion, or… Exactly, Taylor smiled. Every person who walks through those doors is living their own story. Just like you were when you wrote those tweets. Just like you are now. She walked back to the scattered papers and picked up what looked like lyrics in progress. You know what the hardest part of songwriting is? Not the melodies or the rhyme. It's staying connected to those raw, real emotions that made you start writing in the first place. Success, fame, time, they all try to build walls around your heart. The trick is not letting them. Marcus thought about his younger self, excited to start his dream job at the Four Seasons. How had he let that excitement turn to cynicism? I don't know if I can find my way back, he admitted. You already have, Taylor said, handing him back his earlier attempt at writing. The fact that you're worried about it, that you care, that's the first step. The walls are already coming down. She glanced at the clock. I have to take this call. But Marcus, remember something for me? What's that? That kid who found hope in hotel lobbies and strength in songs? He grew up to be you. And you get to decide who he becomes next. As Maria led him back to the elevator, Marcus felt lighter somehow. The shame was still there, the regret still fresh, but underneath it all was something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Back at the front desk, Kevin was pretending to organize key cards. So, he asked, trying to sound casual and failing completely. How was it? Marcus looked at his reflection in the lobby's glass doors. His eyes were red, his tie was crooked, and his hair was a mess. But for the first time in years, he recognized the person staring back at him. It was. He paused, searching for the right words. It was like waking up, like remembering who I used to be. Kevin nodded sagely, then grinned. Cool. Also, while you were gone, someone threw up in the elevator. Marcus laughed. A real, genuine laugh that echoed off the marble walls. You know what, Kev? That's okay. Let's go clean it up. And for the first time in years, he meant it. Every mess was part of someone's story, and he was ready to start being part of the good ones again. 1 year, that's how long it had been since that night with Taylor Swift in Suite 1989. The marble lobby hadn't changed, still gleaming under crystal chandeliers, still echoing with the click of expensive shoes and the whispered conversations of guests. But Marcus Anderson was a different person entirely. Good morning, Mrs. Chen, he called out as one of their regular guests crossed the lobby. How was your granddaughter's recital? The elderly woman beamed, pulling out her phone. Oh, Marcus, you remembered. Look at these photos. Kevin, now promoted to senior bellhop, watched the interaction with amusement. After Mrs. Chen continued to her elevator, he approached the front desk. You know, Kevin said, leaning against the polished counter, if someone had told me a year ago that you'd become the hotel's most beloved employee, I would have laughed in their face. Marcus smiled, straightening a stack of welcome pamphlets. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd remember how to care again, I wouldn't have believed them either. The changes hadn't happened overnight. After that night with Taylor, Marcus had started small, learning guests' names again, asking about their days, and actually listening to the answers. Taking time to help new employees instead of dismissing them. David had noticed. Just last week, during their monthly staff meeting, he'd used Marcus as an example of exceptional customer service. Remember last month's wedding party? David had said to the assembled staff, 300 guests, half of them drunk, and that mess with the cake? Marcus handled it like a symphony conductor, not a single complaint. The memory of that chaotic night made Marcus chuckle. A year ago, he would have seen it as a disaster. Now he saw it as part of someone's story, a funny anecdote they'd tell at anniversaries. Earth to Marcus. Kevin's voice snapped him back to the present. Your shift ended 10 minutes ago. You planning to live here now? Marcus checked his watch. Sorry, lost in thought. Just waiting for Sarah to arrive for the handover. Speaking of Sarah, Kevin wiggled his eyebrows suggestively. Don't start, Marcus warned, but he was smiling. Sarah was new, having joined the hotel 3 months ago. She had a laugh that made guests turn their heads and a way of handling difficult situations that reminded Marcus of someone else who taught him about grace under pressure. The front doors swung open, letting in a burst of autumn air and Sarah herself, her dark curls slightly windblown. Sorry I'm late, she called out, hurrying to the desk. The subway was. She stopped, noticing something on Marcus's desk. What's that? Marcus followed her gaze to the small frame that had occupied the corner of his desk for the past year. Inside was a printed tweet, now slightly faded. At Taylor Swift 13, I got beat up at school again today. Came home and played mean on repeat. You make me feel strong. Thank you. Just a reminder, he said softly. Sarah knew the story. Everyone at the hotel did. It had become something of a legend, though Marcus never told all the details. Some things were too personal, too precious to share. Well, Sarah said, setting down her bag, you'll never believe who just booked the presidential suite for next week. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. No way. Sarah grinned. Way. Under Sarah Thompson. Same as last time I heard. Kevin's eyes widened. She's coming back? Dude, are you okay with that? Marcus touched the framed tweet gently. Yeah, I am. Actually, I've been hoping she would. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Every detail had to be perfect, not because they were afraid of Taylor Swift, but because they wanted to show her how things had changed, how he had changed. The night of her arrival, Marcus made sure he was at the front desk. Sarah had offered to cover, but he'd insisted on being there. You sure about this? David asked for the 10th time, his forehead vein notably calm these days. I'm sure, Marcus replied, adjusting his tie, a nervous habit he'd never quite broken. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the same time as a year ago, the front doors opened. Taylor Swift walked in, wearing the same oversized hoodie and sunglasses. But this time, Marcus was ready. Good evening, Ms. Thompson, he said warmly. Welcome back to the Four Seasons. Taylor removed her sunglasses, and Marcus saw the recognition in her eyes, followed by something else, approval. Hello, Marcus, she said softly. You're still here. Thanks to you. She studied his desk, noting the framed tweet. I see you kept your reminder. Every day, he nodded. It helps me remember who I am, who I want to be. Taylor smiled. That same warm, genuine smile from suite 1989. Tell me something, she said, leaning slightly on the desk. That kid who wrote that tweet, did he find his way back? Marcus thought about the past year, about the hundreds of small moments of kindness he'd chosen, about learning to see people's stories again, about finding his way back to himself. He did, Marcus replied. And he's not letting go this time. As he processed her check-in under the correct alias, of course, Taylor noticed something else on his desk. A small notebook, well-worn and filled with writing. You kept at it, she observed. Marcus blushed slightly. Just thoughts, little moments, things I want to remember. May I? She asked, gesturing to the notebook. He hesitated only a moment before handing it to her. She flipped through the pages, reading his observations about guests, his reflections on kindness, his small attempts at poetry. This is beautiful, she said finally, handing it back. You found your voice. I had a good teacher, he replied. Someone who showed me that the worst thing you can do to yourself is build walls around your heart. Kevin appeared with a luggage cart, trying and failing to act casual. Taylor gave him a knowing smile. Good to see you again, Kevin. Still practicing those towel swans? Kevin blushed furiously. Apparently, Taylor remembered everything. As they prepared to head to her suite, Taylor paused. You know, Marcus, revenge would have been easier. Getting you fired, making a scene. That's what some people would have done. Why didn't you? She glanced at the framed tweet, then back at him. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment. Sometimes it's helping someone remember who they were before the world hurt. Marcus watched her walk toward the elevator, Kevin trailing behind with her bags. The lobby looked exactly the same as it had a year ago. Same marble floors, same crystal chandeliers, same elegant furnishing. But everything else had changed. Sarah appeared at his side. "So that's her." "That's her," Marcus nodded. "The person who taught me how to be myself again." "You know," Sarah said thoughtfully, "this place really is magic sometimes. People check in one person and check out another." Marcus smiled, touching the framed tweet one more time. "Yeah, it is. Every person who walks through those doors has a story. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we get to be part of the chapters where they find their way back to themselves." Later that night, after his shift ended, Marcus sat in the empty lobby. It had become his habit to stay a few extra minutes, writing in his notebook about the day's experiences. Tonight's entry felt particularly important. "Dear younger me," he wrote, "you wouldn't believe where we are now. Remember when you used to dream about working in a place like this? About making people feel special? We lost that dream for a while, but we found it again. And guess what? It's even better than we imagined." The sound of the elevator made him look up. Taylor was coming back down, still in her casual clothes but without the disguise. "Can't sleep?" he asked as she approached the desk. "Songwriting hours," she smiled. "The night just feels more honest somehow." She noticed his notebook. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" Marcus gestured to one of the lobby's elegant armchairs. Taylor sat down, curling her legs underneath her in a way that reminded him how normal she could be, despite her extraordinary life. "I read your tweets," she said. "All of them, from the past year." Marcus felt his face warm. After their encounter, he'd started tweeting again, not to her directly, but about his journey, about learning to be kind again, about finding magic in ordinary moments. "They're helping people," Taylor continued. "Just like my songs helped you. The circle keeps going." "I never expected anyone to read them," he admitted. "I just needed to put it out there, to remind myself who I am." "Who are you, Marcus Anderson?" He thought about it for a moment, looking around the lobby that had witnessed both his lowest point and his redemption. "I'm the kid who found hope in music and magic in hotel lobbies. I'm the person who remembers what it feels like to be hurt, so I choose to be kind. I'm someone who fell apart and put himself back together, better than before." Taylor nodded, clearly pleased. "You know what the best part of this story is?" "What's that?" "It's not about me at all. It's about you, about choosing who you want to be, every single day." From the entrance, the night doorman called out, "Miss Swift, your car is here." Taylor stood up, smoothing her hoodie. Late-night studio session. Songs don't write themselves. Before she left, she turned back one last time. "Marcus?" "Yes?" "Keep writing. Keep feeling. Keep being the person who makes others feel less alone," she smiled. "And maybe next time I'm in town, we can write something together." After she left, Marcus looked down at his notebook. Below his entry, Taylor had written something while he wasn't looking. "To the boy who found strength in song. Thank you for becoming someone who gives strength to others. Your friend, Taylor." The lobby fell quiet again, but it wasn't the heavy silence of a year ago. It was the peaceful quiet of a place where stories began, where people found their way back to themselves, and where a bitter hotel worker had learned to open his heart again. Marcus picked up his pen one last time that night. Sometimes the greatest act of kindness is believing in someone, even when they've forgotten how to believe in themselves. And sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment. It's helping someone remember who they were before the world made them forget. He closed the notebook, gathered his things, and walked toward the door. Tomorrow would bring new guests, new stories, new chances to be kind, and he was ready for all of it. Because sometimes the most important person you can find your way back to is yourself. The end.